Hello and welcome everybody to our call today and our talk today. If you're listening or if you're watching, if you're new to the show, I know, welcome. We talk about a lot of different and interesting kinds of topics. And today we're going to be talking about unconscious bias with Dr. Samantha Weeks. So I'm really looking forward to that. For anyone who's new to the show, you might be going, why is a financial planner having this kind of an interview? And the answer is I am interviewing people that I find interesting and inspiring. I am writing a book, and one of the chapters is going to be wealth as a team sport. And I think there's so many things in life, no matter what you do, that require the help of others and all these connector points. So today we're going to be talking about unconscious bias because I have a very deep interest in this. I'm still in the Air Force Reserve, so this topic comes up for me a lot when it comes to dealing with the troops that I work with and the airmen that I work with. So it's going to be a really interesting topic. And besides, Dr. Weeks, Dr. Samantha Weeks is just an amazing person. So very lucky to have her today and to share her with you all. So I just wanted to go ahead and take a minute to let me do an introductions for those of you that don't know her, and then we'll just jump right into our conversation. So Dr. Samantha Weeks is a passionate leader and speaker with extensive knowledge and experience leading complex organizations and motivating individuals and teams to their highest level of effectiveness. Dr. Weeks served as a colonel in the United States Air Force, and she commanded at the wing level, squadron group wing level, so she's amazing. And she was also the first female solo pilot for the Thunderbirds demonstration team. So Dr. Weeks now, she's continuing to share her academic and experiential lessons through public speaking. She's also a consultant, but I really, if you ever have a chance to hear her or see her as a public speaker, I would definitely make sure I'm there. So welcome, Samantha Weeks.
Thanks, Tara. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with all of your viewers today.
So, I'm just going to jump right in about here's the thing I love about you is I often tell people that with my military experience, I have a lot of experiences that I wouldn't wish on anybody else, but I wouldn't give them back because they're mine. And I am a huge fan of you, and just looking at your resume, I know you have been through a lot of very challenging experiences in addition to all the cool experiences. And what I love is that you're taking that experience and you're sharing it now and helping others navigate the world. And so one of the things I wanted to talk with you about today, because you have expertise in unconscious bias and vulnerability and all these different areas, but I wondered if you could just take a minute and kind of level set the audience today. So when we hear the word unconscious bias, what do you want us to picture in our heads when we hear that phrase? What does that mean?
So really, it's defined as the unintentional or automatic mental associations that occur in your brain across a variety of aspects. So gender, sexuality, race, motherhood. It can really be anything that your brain makes automatic and quick decisions on that affect the social environment around you.
So tell me if I'm right. So when I was thinking about this, what popped right into my head was male nurse, and which is funny because my dad was a nurse, but you still have that male nurse. And I can remember one that always grated on me when I was going through flying in different courses is it was always a pilot this, pilot that, until it came to just talking about aircraft accidents or mishaps. And then it was the female pilot. So do you have any other examples so that we can lock our heads onto it? Because I think there's a lot of them out there.
There are, and I'll just say that they stem from our traditions and our norms and our values and our culture and our experience. And there's a lot of research that say these are actually formed in adolescence. And so there's a Harvard implicit bias test. So we may hear unconscious bias or implicit, which means it's not necessarily a conscious thing that you are choosing to do. We have conscious bias also that are exhibited in the world, but more often and more impactful and frequent are implicit biases. So male nurse is a great one because typically we will associate female and family together and male with career. So the other one, to flip it on its head a little bit, is female CEO or female leader, right? Same kind of way that you just talked about it, we'll hear CEO, CEO, CEO. But if we're going to talk about a female CEO, we have to highlight that she's a female CEO because we're trying to, in this case, empower that and bring recognition and acknowledgement and awareness to the fact that a woman is in the C-suite. Male teacher is another one.
Oh yeah, right? Yeah, absolutely. I remember reading a few years back Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, and I remember him talking about that. Like it's like ingrained in us. It's part of a survival mechanism that we quickly recognize, like what's the same and what's the other, as part of our survival mechanism.
It is, and it actually all comes from the brain, and it's part of the amygdala. And many people will have heard of amygdala hijack before, but your amygdala is a part of the brain that helps you really assess fight or flight type of mentalities. And it also helps us to make those quick shortcuts in order to process all the information quickly. And sometimes we make associations, and sometimes those associations are really good, and sometimes they bring us into this world of implicit bias.
So it's really interesting. So what got you interested in this? Because you went from, the Air Force Academy, and you're flying fighters and being in this intense space. So how did you get over into this kind of area of discovery?
It really came out in about 2015. I had been sponsored by the Air Force to go get my PhD, and I wanted to focus on leader development and leadership development. And I highlight the fact that those two things are different because often we lump it together. But leader development focuses on yourself and your own ability to develop your human capital as an individual. So your self-awareness, self-regulation, self-motivation, and overall self-efficacy. Whereas leadership development, especially we need that in the military, focuses on social capital. So your collaboration, cooperation, conflict management, bringing people together to see one purpose, one goal, and elevate the organization over the individual. And I really felt that the Air Force needed to spend a little bit more time in developing its leaders in that human capital sense. And then from there, just kind of starting to understand some of the things that hold us back as leaders or as organizations, and experience, sadly, brought me to really understanding implicit bias and its effects on the individual as well as the organization to reach its highest potential.
So that's really interesting. So you've taken what you experienced, and then you were able to get this PhD program so it's almost like, I feel like you're almost like a translator now, because you've had the experiences and now you've gone off and gotten the PhD, and now you're being able to explain to the rest of us, like, why we do some of the things that we do.
And how do we overcome those things to be better individually and collectively? Because step one of implicit bias is really being educated that this stuff exists, and it affects every single one of us. There's not a person out there that has zero implicit bias. So you have to understand that it exists. It exists for all of us. And then we can move forward with, what do we do after we embrace that fact?
Well, and here's a simple question is, so I have it, so why do I care? Why do I even care?
Because you want to be a better person. You want to treat all those around you with dignity and respect, and you want to embrace everybody for what they bring to the table, from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, but even beyond that, from a belonging standpoint to the organization. And some of our actions that can occur every day inhibit that evolution and elevation of our organization because of our small microaggressions that may exist in our daily interactions.
I love that. And you're reminding me, I can remember early on, one of my commanders kind of made this plea with us. And he said, it's a little tongue in cheek, but he said, don't do the right thing because it's the right thing. But whoever you're on a team, and whoever's the weakest link, that's as strong as you're going to be. So why would you want to marginalize anyone on your team? Because that's going to be your point of failure. So don't do it because it's right. Just do it because it makes your team better.
Either one, right? I'm not necessarily sure that I care what your motivation is. in this sense, or in this case, as long as the outcome is to be a better human ultimately and treat others better and embrace everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to tap into, probably you did some of this with your PhD research, but I've been told, at least anecdotally, that there's a lot of research shows that when everybody is recognized and feels included and is part of the team, and doesn't have the effects of that kind of bias on them, it helps the bottom line for companies. It makes companies stronger. They perform better. Did you come across any of that when you were doing your PhD?
Absolutely. It is a proven fact that belongingness to an organization increases productivity, which increases the bottom line. I don't have the exact statistic for you, but yes, there's a ton of research out there that proves that point.
So, and you touched on it a minute ago, and I wanted to let that go, is you talked about finance or self-efficacy. And one of the points where we connected early on is I'm writing my book on finance and how people take control of their financial world and feel like they're in the driver's seat and not just at the mercy of everything that's happening to them financially. And I was looking at financial self-efficacy. And that's where you connected me and said I should check out Angela Duckworth. So can you just share a little bit about her and like what kind of work that she does?
So Angela Duckworth talks about grit and how we use our life and our experiences and we stay focused on our future and we persevere through tough times in order to achieve and drive ourselves forward toward our dream. We have that self-efficacy to, continue through the hard times. And we all have grit in our life, or the majority of us come along some struggle and some dip and some difficulty. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? Do we allow that to stop us? Or do we figure out when that obstacle is in our path, how to climb over it, around it, under it, or go straight through it?
So yeah, I love that. And like when I was started on this speaking journey, because like you, I'm working on becoming a public speaker, and they talked about one of the classes, the dip, like in your life where you're going along in life and then you have some experience that's traumatic that you have to overcome. And then you have that choice of like, either you stay down there in victimhood or you figure out a way to rise above and then share that with other people. And I thought that was really, really interesting. It sounds like that's also what Angela Duckworth is talking about. Do you have any examples of like a mini one? You don't need to bare your soul, but do you have an example of like something where you came across that a bit of adversity and you kind of had a choice in that moment to just, be grumpy about it and complain about it, or go, you know what, deep breath. let me figure out a way to come out of this.
Yeah, for me, I wanted to be a fighter pilot since I was 6 years old. And in 1981, women couldn't even legally do that. And I stayed true with drive and determination to achieve that dream in 1998, flying the F-15C. But in my very first fighter squadron, I started to struggle. My first check ride didn't go so well. And I found myself as the only female pilot in this all-male squadron of type A overachievers. That's kind of synonymous to fighter pilot. And it was definitely a low point. And I didn't necessarily know who my allies were or supporters were or, friends were per se within the squadron at that time. And I had to look deep within to go, what am I going to do? Am I going to allow this stumble, probably my first failure that I truly experienced in life at 23 years old, to stop me dead in my tracks? Or was I going to figure out how to pick myself up, carry on, and prove that through hard work, drive, and determination, I could be successful? And I was. And it took a long time to be okay with saying that I'm an average fighter pilot with an extremely strong work ethic, because who wants to be average in this life? But I'm okay with that. I'm an average fighter pilot who works my butt off day in and day out to be better tomorrow than I was today.
Okay. I love that story. And that's always a question I have in the back of my head is, when did it become bad to be average?
Exactly.
Like average is good. And it's along that lines. My husband always tells me, he's like, women are going to be equal when it's okay for you to be equally average. He's like, as long as there's this feeling like you have to be better than everybody else just to belong. And so I always think that's funny. But, I had that same experience. That was part of my motivation to create my financial business, was I was getting involved and starting to look around and go, okay, some people seem to have money, and how come I don't? And I realized, like, I came across different classmates of mine, like when I was in my first flying squadron, and like they owned real estate, like a lot of real estate. And I'm like, I'm just learning how to fly the airplane. I'm figuring out how to do my assault landings. I bought a house. I thought I was doing good. And you guys like own all this real estate. And what's happening? Like, is there some class that I missed out on? And so trying to figure out, like, how do you go back and not just start beating yourself up and say, well, I guess that life sucks and this is all I can do, but go, well, how do they do that? Because, there's ways to figure things out and go through that. So it's really interesting, this idea. So with the what I'm interested about unconscious bias is, obviously it's out there. We all have it. The old joke about the doctor that says her son's has been killed or in a car wreck and they have to do surgery and they can't do it, and it turns out the doctor is the mom. How do you do that when you see it? Like, you're like, oh, okay, someone is judging me based on something that has nothing to do with me, but because of what they do. How do you tell someone to deal with that? Like, humor, or what do you do in the moment?
So humor is actually not necessarily effective,
Really?
in order to counter and evolve beyond implicit bias. Because if a person is not truly aware of what implicit bias is, it comes across just as a joke. And if they happen to be that person who's more in line with is it implicit or is it explicit, then it's completely disregarded. So it takes a little bit more headstrong approach in order to truly confront implicit bias. And it takes allyship. And allyship is extremely important in order for us to change our culture and change our society. And so just picture this. Happens in the military, it happens in the boardroom all the time. We go into a meeting in a boardroom and there's no assigned seats except for probably the CEO seat at the head of the table. A woman sits down at the table and somebody who is male with higher tenure or a higher position looks at her and she automatically gets up and leaves and moves further away or moves to the side of the table rather than maintaining her seat, because why not? What do we do about it in that situation? Does she stand her ground or does she get up and leave? And then if you're sitting in the room also as a male or a female right next to that person or across the room, what do you do? And so allyship is, how do we see the implicit bias that's going on around us and speak up for somebody else? Which we all know is much easier, right? It's much easier to defend somebody else than it is necessarily to say, I don't appreciate that.
Right.
Especially as a junior person or, a lower ranking person, whether in position or tenure or age. And we have to be able to, one, stand up for ourselves, and two, stand up when we see those situations around us.
That's a really huge point. I've never understood why, but it's true that you can't speak on your own behalf as well as you can speak on somebody else's.
It just seems to be a little bit more difficult in finding the courage to confront those situations. And really, with implicit bias, understanding what they are, right? They affect women more predominantly in the work environment, and we have likability bias. So men and women like men better, right? So this is not men are the bad people, it's men and women like men better. Affinity bias kind of goes along with it in the workplace. Predominantly, C-suite level positions and senior level positions are held by men. So men have an affinity toward other men as far as leadership positions and cultivating and sponsoring and raising people up. Then performance and attribution bias kind of go together, that we tend to underestimate women's performance and overestimate man's performance. And with attribution bias, we highlight women's failures and struggles, and we even can associate some males' failures and struggles to women if they're on the same team. And then the last one is hard, and it's maternal bias, because many women out there are moms. And when we see women who are mothers in the workplace, they are frequently attributed to be less committed, but the crazier one is less competent. And then the last female centric implicit bias actually goes to double discrimination. So you add any of those first five, and you add African American, Asian, Hispanic, homosexual onto one of those, and it's double discrimination, and the impact on those communities that have two is even more significant on the female Caucasian in the workplace.
So that's a lot. And so why I think I have observed those things to be true. How do we have that conversation with our male counterparts so that we keep them engaged in the conversation so they don't just feel defensive?
That's step one, though, right? Is education. And it is having those crucial conversations when we see it, right?
Mhm.
And a great place where we see one of those kind of microaggressions or implicit actions is sitting around that table again, and a man or a woman interrupts another woman, right? So
Right.
say stop. Say, hey, I'd like to hear what Tara just said. Again, whether man or woman. Then when you're done and on a break, look for the opportunity and, share the statistics of how more often women are interrupted than men, so that we can, start to grow that awareness in a very unconfrontational way with men in the workplace. And if you have to, because you're not necessarily ready to just jump all in, do it when I interrupt you, Tara, and have the conversation with a man.
Right.
Because then it's like, oh, did you see, that men and women interrupt women? And just start on a low, not necessarily extremely impactful way to start planting the seed and then growing it and cultivating it. Because the next time that man hears some other man or woman interrupt a woman in a meeting, he may be the one who speaks up and says, I'd like to hear what Sally said today. And she just got stepped on. And then that really starts to level set the playing field and embrace women into the conversation.
I love that because that's something I can really sink your teeth in and do it. And I think the term I learned for that in the leadership class I just did was to try to amplify other people's voices. So when you see people that
Absolutely.
are not being heard, to amplify that. And there was actually one guy in the room that he was amazing at it. And I went and talked to him. I pulled him aside later and I pointed out how he did that. And he was like, thank you. He's like, I have been working on that. He's like, it's starting to happen. He's like, I wasn't even realizing that I was doing it. So I love it that can just become like a habit pattern, and that it would be something you can teach people or show people just by modeling it yourself.
And the encouragement that you gave him and the affirmation that he was progressing forward and making an impact on those around him will carry him even further,
And I
because it's
wasn't even
noted and
trying.
seen and, encouraged.
Right. And it was funny because I wasn't even trying to do that. I was just curious. I loved how he was doing that. So that's amazing. So now I want to shift gears just a little bit. It's probably not a bunch, but can we talk a little bit about vulnerability? I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and one of her quotes that I love is to choose courage over comfort. So how does that kind of relate, this idea of being vulnerable? Because, being in the military, like vulnerable, I'm having to start to work on adjusting to that and go, okay, that's maybe okay to be vulnerable.
It is. And vulnerability, and Brene Brown's work is just amazing. And it's very true. And the more that men and women can embrace her work in the workplace and in their personal lives, the stronger and more confident and less fear of shame we'll have in our daily interactions. And so, courage over comfort, it goes perfectly with the implicit bias, right? How do I speak up for myself? How do you speak up for me and not be seen as, women sticking together just for women's sake? I sat down with two women that I work with the other night at dinner, and it was the first time that I had met one. And she's like, what do you think about the three of us eating dinner together? And what's it going to look like to the men who are at those other two tables? And I'm like, because of the work that I've done, I don't really care what it looks like, and I'm not going to necessarily always sit next to you. If I happen to sit there, great. If I don't, great. But I'm going to not be afraid to embrace the other woman in the room, especially when you're looking at very small percentages. And so the courage to be me and the courage to embrace the person that I need to get to know. I'd never met her. So going to dinner with her allowed me to connect and start to form a relationship. And if the men don't like it, that's okay. I'm going to sit down with them tomorrow, or I've already sat down with them, and they're going to see that relationships truly are a center of gravity. And the more we are all connected, the better we will be. But the way that we do vulnerability with implicit bias is one, speaking up for ourselves, and two, sharing our experiences. Because sharing your experiences, especially with another woman or man who may not be aware or who is exhibiting microaggressions, helps them to be self aware and helps them then to assess what they want to change and then make their own commitment to change. And so again, maternal bias is very rampant. Again, not a man versus woman thing. I had a female leader who told me that I could not do my job while pregnant in the Air Force. And we weren't talking about flying, we were talking about leading. I had 6 non-flying squadrons and 1 flying squadron, and I had a female tell me I couldn't lead while pregnant.
Wow.
We got to change that, right?
That's amazing. So I can just share with you in my civil engineering squadron, the top 3 women are pregnant, and there's no question about that. They're all on top of it.
Absolutely.
and it's that's at least not happening at the level that I'm in, and I appreciate that. So before I do a recap, I was just going to check in with you because we've kind of covered a lot of material. Is there any, if you were to leave everybody today with one big thought, what would it be?
To go learn more about yourself with respect to implicit bias. Go and Google the Harvard Implicit Association test. Take the test and learn about what goes on in your brain that you may not be aware about, so that you can then have some awareness on it and choose to commit yourself to evolve beyond those or change those neural pathways so that you can uplift others in the organization rather than have a microaggression that mentally and physically will impact the recipient of those microaggressions.
I love it. So I just want to do a quick recap. I can't capture everything. You can go back and watch the program again because we covered a lot of material. But here's some of the big takeaways that I just got from today's show was, let's make sure you know yourself and don't be defensive just because we all have these biases, and you don't know what you do because we're all raised in different ways and have different communities we come through. So take some time to know yourself. Find ways to speak up for others. Find a way to amplify. If someone is trying to contribute to the conversation and they're not being able to wedge themselves into the conversation, or I love the example you used of coming into the room and there's the table and where do I sit? And if you can be cognizant, if you're in a space that you own, help that person navigate that. Don't make them try to guess and go, should I sit here? Oh no, should I sit here? Kind of help create that space would be a wonderful thing. And I love this idea that being vulnerable is hard, I think, because we're afraid of being ashamed. And the more that we can find places, you don't have to share everything, but pick a story that you can share that you're comfortable with. And then that helps other people know, oh, okay, we all have our moments where we don't feel good about things. And so thank you so much for sharing all of that, Sam. Now, Samantha, if people want to get a hold of you to either bring you in as a speaker for their organization or do some consulting work, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you?
They can email me at info@sweeksconsulting.com or check out the website also there. Currently under revision, but it's up right now. So info@sweeksconsulting or Samantha Weeks Consulting or sweeksconsulting.com. All of those will work, or reach out to you since you got all of my information also.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Dr. Weeks, for being our guest today. I think I've learned a ton. I'm going to go take that Harvard test to see what my biases are. So for everybody that's watching today, I'm very incredibly excited to hear about your amazing success that you're going to have. And I would love for people to share stories from today about what happened, or if they had a story that they want to share or something that they were able to help do, or especially if you were able to amplify or stand up for somebody else in your sphere of influence. Love to hear those stories. This is just tremendously important, and I just look forward to hearing how everybody is taking this and taking it to action. So if anyone would like to contact Samantha Weeks, the information is posted in the comments here, so you can have that. You can reach out to me. We can make sure that you get connected. Don't forget, you can share this interview with your friends who may not have been able to listen in today. I'm really looking forward to sharing a must-know topic with you next time. Can't wait to hear about all your success. I will talk with you later. Bye.